Now that we know what domestication is and how weird it is in a lot of ways, let's talk about what we domesticated, starting with plants. Now, the ancient ancestors of the domesticated plants that we use today are still around, and they grow in the environment that a lot of the domesticated forms are grown in today. And in order to domesticate them, there were a few obstacles, big ones. Number one, they were highly specialized to grow in the environment that it naturally occurred in. They don't do too well when you try to move them from place to place or plant the seeds in a new environment. But they were tough and they could survive the force of the elements. Next, the seeds were really small. Wild grasses, grains, and cereals have seeds that are very small and hard to identify when on the ground or handle with human hands. Next was the texture. The seeds were extremely durable, almost like nutshells, and had to be made softer, just so we can prepare, eat, and digest them properly. That brings us to the biggest obstacles that early farmers had to face. They're called glooms and rachis. They're basically what keeps the seeds in the pod and the pods on the plant, respectively. Now, a gloom is basically a husk around the pod. Think of the green part around a cob of corn. Before domestication, many of our crops had glooms that were just too thick to get to, and as we talked about before, the nutrition just wasn't worth the trouble. Now, a rachis is this part, and it holds the pod onto the larger plant stem. When the plant matures, it grows brittle, and the seeds fall off. They would get so brittle that they would fall off if you tried to pick them up and harvest enough to make some kind of a meal. And back then, I imagine you don't got time to be losing food. Here's an ear of corn next to its ancient ancestor teosinte. Then you can see what I mean. A lot had to happen to go from this to this. And it was a big deal because we got a lot out of it. First off, they were edible. They were also high in nutrition. And they can grow anywhere with human care. They were larger in size, softer in texture. The glooms kept the seeds in place during harvest. And the rachis have a longer early period of strength. Now, each plant that we domesticated required different and exact degrees of change. What's crazy is these are just the changes that we can see with our eyes and feel with our fingers. What's even crazier is what we can't see or feel, and that's in its genetics, particularly in chromosome count. In the domestication process, the number of chromosomes doubled, tripled, or even quadrupled in some cases. Let's take a look. For the sake of time, we'll just look at wheat, barley, and millet. We all come from emmer. Let me get myself smaller. Emmer at the bottom, you can see, has 28 chromosomes. Wheat, the common wheat, bread wheat, 42, pasta wheat, 48, barley, 14, millet, 14, all from emmer. And based on what we know right now, there was actually a shockingly little amount of regional variation in these early grain grasses. So, what are the drawbacks of domestication? They're completely or mostly dependent on human intervention, and they all took a lifespan cut, going from multi-year crops to seasonal crops. The idea of domestication always sounded silly to me because it was like, oh, son, we're farmers. We come from a long line of farmers. Here's a seed. You plant the seed and grow the biggest seeds and only the biggest seeds from the crops that grow from those previous seeds. And then you tell your son and his son and that son after him to do the same. And maybe in 300 generations, we'll have something to eat. It never made sense to me. Honestly, how do you convince people to keep doing this for hundreds of years? Well, there is one hypothesis, and it doesn't explain everything, like the chromosome count or the glooms and rachis, the degree of change, but it does make a lot more sense, and it's more relatable than the scenario I just gave. And that is the beer before bread hypothesis. And that basically says that people just love alcohol so much that is what the motivation to do this for so long was. Because teosinte, the corn ancestor, and wheat in all of its forms can be made into beer. Clean water was hard to come by, and the alcohol killed any contaminants. That's a big reason why most cultures around the world either drink alcoholic beverages or boiled beverages. So like I said, domesticated plants are weird At least weirder than you thought, right? If you thought that was cool, I'm doing animals next. So comment down below which farm animal you'd like me to highlight. I'm Java, this is Capidemics.